In psychology, they say that one of the heaviest weights people carry is the burden of expectations. From the moment we are born, we inherit invisible scripts about how life should look, what success means, what love should feel like, what paths are acceptable, and what failures are unforgivable. These expectations come from parents, culture, society, and sometimes from the voice inside ourselves that has been shaped by all of them. At first, they seem harmless, even helpful. A parent says, asterisk, you'll make us proud one day. Asterisk, a teacher says, asterisk, you're meant for great things. Asterisk, a culture says, asterisk, this is the kind of life worth living. Asterisk, the child absorbs these messages. And slowly they become rules etched into the mind. The person learns not to ask, asterisk, what do I want? Asterisk, but instead, asterisk, what am I supposed to want? Asterisk, as the years pass, the expectations multiply. Career, relationships, appearance, behavior. Everything is measured against invisible standards. When we achieve them, the applause is loud but brief. When we fall short, the silence feels deafening. And in both cases, the question remains, asterisk, am I living my life, or just a life others scripted for me? Asterisk. Psychologists explain that this burden becomes especially dangerous when expectations are internalized so deeply that we confuse them with our own desires. We chase careers we do not love, relationships that do not fulfill us, goals that do not belong to us, all because the fear of disappointing others feels greater than the fear of betraying ourselves. The result is a quiet kind of exhaustion. Even when we succeed, we feel empty because the victory belongs to someone else's dream. Even when we smile, the joy feels thin because it is built on approval, not authenticity. And in the silence of night, when no one is watching, the mind whispers a question we try hardest to avoid. Asterisk, what if I never chose any of this? What if I have been living for everyone but me? Asterisk. In psychology, they say that the burden of expectations is not just about pressure from others. It is about the prison we build inside ourselves, the one whose bars are made of shoulds and musts. And until we learn to distinguish their voice from our own, we will continue to live lives that look full on the outside but feel hollow within. Expectations rarely reveal themselves as chains. They appear instead as responsibilities, ambitions, and goals that look noble on the surface but feel crushing underneath. In daily life, this weight seeps into every corner, shaping choices without our awareness. People wake up not asking, asterisk, what would make me feel alive today? Asterisk, but instead, asterisk, what should I do to be worthy today? Asterisk, at work, the script is relentless. A person takes a job not out of passion but out of obligation, because it is stable, respectable, or impressive to others. Every promotion feels like survival, not triumph, because behind each achievement waits the next expectation. Even praise feels hollow, because it is not for who they are, but for how well they performed. Work becomes less about expression and more about living up to invisible standards. In relationships, expectations act like silent judges. A partner feels pressure to be the perfect spouse, the flawless parent, the endlessly patient friend. When they falter, guilt floods in, not because of their own values, but because of the imagined voices of others saying, asterisk, you should be better, you should be more. Asterisk, this burden steals joy from intimacy, turning love into performance and family into obligation. Friendships are not spared. Many people measure themselves against others' milestones, marriages, houses, careers, silently asking, asterisk, am I behind? Am I enough? Asterisk, social media amplifies the script, making every scroll a reminder of who we are supposed to be. Even in laughter with friends, comparison lingers, like static in the background of joy. Even the self is shaped by expectations. People look in the mirror and do not see themselves, but the gap between who they are and who they are supposed to be, weight, style, confidence, all become metrics of comparison. Instead of belonging to themselves, they live as projects for others' approval. Psychologists explain that these expectations drain life of authenticity. Every decision, what to study, where to live, how to spend time, becomes filtered through should instead of want. The more expectations are met, the more they multiply, until life feels like running on a treadmill that never stops. And yet, The most painful part is this. No matter how much we achieve, the applause is temporary, but the silence of self-betrayal lingers. We can meet every standard and still lie awake at night wondering, asterisk, whose life am I really living? Asterisk. One of the deepest reasons people carry the burden of expectations is the fear of disappointing others. Approval is often learned as survival. As children, love feels conditional. Asterisk, be good and you'll be praised. Fail and you'll be scolded. Excel and you'll be loved. Asterisk, these patterns teach the nervous system that belonging is earned, not given freely. And so, as adults, the fear of letting others down becomes stronger than the desire to be true to ourselves. This fear seeps into every decision. Someone may choose a career they don't love because a parent once said, asterisk, this is what success looks like. Asterisk, they may stay in relationships long after they've lost themselves because walking away feels like betrayal. They may silence their real opinions among friends or colleagues because honesty risks disapproval. The inner script repeats, asterisk, don't cause disappointment. Don't shake the image. Don't risk being less than expected. Asterisk. Psychologists explain that this dynamic is tied to what they call conditional worth. When worth feels tied to performance or compliance, the cost of saying no feels unbearable. To follow one's own path feels selfish, even dangerous, because it means risking the loss of love, pride, or respect from those we care about most. The mind whispers, asterisk, better to sacrifice yourself than to be abandoned. Asterisk, but this bargain comes at a heavy price. The more a person lives to protect others from disappointment, the more they disappoint themselves. Dreams are shelved. Desires are minimized. The authentic self is buried under the mask of the dutiful child, partner, friend, or worker. Outwardly, they may look reliable, successful, admirable. Inwardly, they feel invisible, even to themselves. Over time, this quiet betrayal creates resentment. They begin to resent the very people they were trying so hard to please. Even though those people may never have asked for such sacrifices, they resent their own life, which feels borrowed rather than lived. And worst of all, they resent themselves for lacking the courage to choose differently. In psychology, they say that fear of disappointing others is not proof of weakness. It is proof of how desperately we long for belonging. But true belonging cannot be earned by silencing the self. It comes only when we dare to be fully known, even at the risk of disapproval. And until that risk is faced, the weight of expectations will always be heavier than the freedom of authenticity. Expectations do not live only in the mind. They settle into the body, shaping how we feel, how we think, and how we move through life. Psychologists warn that carrying the weight of constant shoulds and musts is not simply stressful. It becomes a slow form of self-erasure, a daily draining of vitality that touches every layer of being. Emotionally, the toll is constant anxiety. A person who lives under expectations wakes each day with a question. Asterisk, will I measure up today? Asterisk, every mistake feels catastrophic. Every success feels temporary. Every silence feels like judgment. Joy becomes fragile because it is tied to approval. Even in moments of celebration, the mind is already racing ahead. Asterisk, what do I need to achieve next to stay worthy? Asterisk, this unending chase leaves no room for rest, only tension. Psychologically, expectations create burnout. The brain, wired for survival, treats every unmet standard like danger. Over time, this produces chronic self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and perfectionism so rigid that nothing ever feels enough. People lose touch with their authentic desires, confusing performance for identity. They forget what it feels like to act from freedom rather than obligation. Physically, the burden writes itself into the body. Shoulders ache under invisible pressure. Jaws clench with unspoken frustration. Sleep grows shallow as the nervous system stays alert. Chronic stress weakens immunity, strains the heart, and accelerates exhaustion. The body becomes a battlefield where the war of expectations is silently fought every day. Spiritually, the damage is profound. Life begins to feel like an endless checklist, stripped of meaning. Instead of asking, asterisk, who am I becoming? Asterisk, the person asks, asterisk, am I good enough yet? Asterisk, the soul shrinks under this weight, because true purpose cannot bloom in soil poisoned by constant comparison. Even achievements lose flavor because they taste of someone else's dream. In psychology, they say that the burden of expectations does not just bend us, it hollows us out. It replaces curiosity with fear, passion with duty, and freedom with performance. And until the weight is questioned, the person risks waking up one day realizing they've lived a life that looked perfect on the outside but left them empty within. When the weight of expectations becomes unbearable, people do not always collapse under it. They adapt. And these adaptations can take many forms, each a strategy for survival in a world that demands more than the soul can carry. Some rebel, some hide, and some double down on pleasing, but all are responses to the same invisible pressure, the need to prove worth. Rebellion is the loudest strategy. Some people reach a breaking point and declare war on the expectations that suffocate them. They quit jobs suddenly, end relationships without warning, abandon studies, or walk away from family traditions. On the outside, it looks like courage or recklessness. On the inside, it is often desperation. The only way they know to breathe again is to burn the script that was handed to them. Yet rebellion, while freeing in the moment, rarely brings lasting peace. The ashes of expectations still linger, and unless the person builds a new story, they risk repeating the cycle under different disguises. Others choose silence instead of fire. They withdraw, becoming invisible. They stop sharing opinions, stop pursuing dreams, stop showing their true selves. It is safer, they think, to hide than to risk disappointing anyone. But this safety costs them connection. Friends drift away, partners feel distance, and the person, though surrounded by people, feels profoundly alone. The weight of expectations does not disappear. It just presses inward, turning isolation into a private prison. Then there are those who go in the opposite direction. Instead of rejecting expectations, they chase them even harder. They become overachievers, perfectionists, endlessly striving for the next goal. Every compliment becomes fuel. Every achievement another proof that they are worthy, at least for now. But beneath the applause lies exhaustion, because no matter how much they accomplish, the voice inside keeps saying, asterisk, not enough. Try harder. Asterisk, the approval that drives them never lasts, but the hunger for it never fades. Psychologists note that all these strategies, rebellion, withdrawal, overachievement, are not solutions but coping mechanisms. They keep the person afloat, but they do not free them, because whether we fight expectations, hide from them, or chase them, the weight is still there. It is only when we begin to question them. Asterisk, whose voice is this? Is it truly mine? Asterisk, that the burden starts to lift. In psychology, they say that the ways we cope with expectations are not proof of weakness, but proof of how deeply we long to breathe. The rebellion, the silence, the striving, all are attempts to find freedom. But true freedom does not come from rejecting or fulfilling expectations. It comes from discovering which ones never belonged to us in the first place. The turning point often comes quietly, like a whisper in the middle of a noisy day. After years of running, performing, and bending under invisible standards, a person pauses long enough to hear a different voice, one that has been buried beneath the shoulds and musts. It is softer, hesitant, but insistent. Asterisk, what do I actually want? Asterisk, at first, this question feels dangerous. The answers may not match the script handed down by family, culture, or society. A career chosen for stability may feel empty. A relationship pursued for appearances may feel hollow. The person begins to realize that they have built a life that looks admirable to others but feels alien to themselves. Psychologists call this the beginning of differentiation, the process of separating the authentic self from the false self created for approval. It is often accompanied by guilt and fear. Guilt, because choosing differently feels like betrayal of those who sacrificed, supported, or expected. Fear, because stepping away from the familiar script means entering the unknown. Yet alongside the guilt and fear, there's a spark of liberation. The person notices that when they allow themselves even small choices based on their own desires, choosing a hobby not for productivity but for joy, saying no without explanation, admitting, I don't want this, a sense of aliveness returns. It is not grand, not yet, but it feels real. This awareness grows slowly. They begin to ask, asterisk, Do I want this job? Or do I just want approval? Asterisk, asterisk. Do I love this partner? Or do I love the idea of fulfilling someone's expectation? Asterisk, asterisk. Am I pursuing this dream for me? Or because it is the only dream I was told to have? Asterisk, the more they ask, the clearer the divide becomes between the life scripted for them and the life they are meant to live. Psychologists emphasize that this stage is fragile. It is easy to slip back into compliance, to confuse fear with truth, to silence the authentic voice again. But once the question has been asked, it cannot be unasked. The awareness becomes a seed, and given time, it grows roots. In psychology, they say that the first act of freedom is not walking away. It is recognizing that you could. The moment you see that your desires and expectations are not the same, the burden begins to shift. And with each honest choice, however small, the invisible weight grows lighter, and life begins to feel like your own. Freedom from expectations does not arrive in a single moment. It unfolds slowly, like a long exhale after years of holding your breath. At first, the steps are almost invisible to others, but for the person taking them, they feel monumental. Each one is an act of defiance against the silent rules that shape their life, and each one creates space for authenticity to take root. The first step is often learning to say no. It may be a quiet refusal to take on extra work, even if others frown. It may be declining a family tradition that no longer resonates. It may be turning down a path everyone else applauds simply because it does not feel right. The word no becomes a key that unlocks space for the word yes. Yes to something chosen freely, not dictated by obligation. Next comes the act of honesty. Instead of smiling to keep the peace, the person risks saying, asterisk, I don't enjoy this. I don't want this. This is not me. Asterisk at first. The honesty feels terrifying, like stepping off a cliff. But each time it is spoken, the world does not collapse. Instead, they discover something radical. People may not always approve, but life continues, and their soul feels lighter. Over time, the person begins to replace external measures of worth with internal ones. They stop asking, asterisk, did I make them proud? Asterisk, and begin asking, asterisk, am I proud of myself? Asterisk, they measure success not in applause or comparison, but in alignment. Does this choice reflect who I really am? The more they practice, the more the old weight loosens. Relationships begin to shift. Some people drift away, unable to accept the change. Others grow closer, relieved to finally meet the real person beneath the mask. New connections form, built not on performance but on presence. The loneliness that once came from hiding is replaced by a quieter, truer kind of belonging. Psychologists emphasize that these changes are not selfish. They are essential. Living for approval may keep the peace, but it robs the soul. Living authentically may upset some, but it nourishes life itself. Each step toward authenticity is a step away from the cage of should and into freedom of want. In psychology, they say that breaking free from expectations is not about rejecting every rule or responsibility. It is about reclaiming choice. It is about deciding whose voice will guide the next step. And when that voice is finally your own, the burden begins to dissolve, and life starts to feel like it was meant for you all along. When the burden of expectations finally begins to lift, the change is not subtle, it is seismic. The shift may start small, with a single choice made for the self, but its ripple spreads through every corner of life. Freedom from invisible scripts does not simply rearrange external circumstances. It reshapes the inner world, awakening energy, clarity, and presence that have been hidden beneath years of performance. The first transformation is in energy. What once felt like constant exhaustion begins to lighten. The fatigue that came from endless striving, from carrying masks and meeting standards, slowly fades. People discover that when they stop living for approval, their body no longer burns energy on anxiety and self-policing. Instead, energy flows into creativity, curiosity, and joy. Rest feels deeper. Movement feels freer. Even the simple act of breathing carries a sense of relief. The second transformation is in relationships. When authenticity enters, connections shift from transactional to genuine. The person no longer hides behind perfection or compliance. They allow themselves to be seen, flaws and all. And in that vulnerability, intimacy grows. Some relationships fall away, unable to survive without the old performance. But the ones that remain, or the ones newly formed, are stronger, richer, more nourishing. Love becomes less about duty and more about choice, less about appearances and more about truth. The third transformation is in perspective. The world no longer feels like a stage to impress or an exam to pass. It becomes a space to explore. Failures turn into lessons instead of proof of inadequacy. Success feels sweeter, not because it meets expectations, but because it reflects alignment with the self. Even setbacks lose some of their sting, because the measure of worth is no longer external applause, but internal integrity. Spiritually, the shift is profound. Without the constant noise of should and must, silence becomes peaceful instead of frightening. The person can hear their own voice, and perhaps something larger, the quiet guidance of intuition, purpose, or faith. Life regains a sense of meaning, not borrowed from others, but discovered within. In psychology, they say that the release from expectations is not just freedom from pressure. It is freedom into authenticity. It is the moment when life stops being borrowed and starts being lived. And when a person tastes that authenticity, even once they know, no applause, no approval, no expectation could ever feel as rich as the simple act of being true. In psychology, they say that the final release from expectations is not about rejecting responsibility or abandoning all roles. It is about reclaiming authorship of one's life. For years, many live as actors in a play they never auditioned for, speaking lines written by others, smiling when the script demands, bowing when the applause comes. But the moment of freedom arrives when they step off the stage, rip the script, and begin writing in their own handwriting. This freedom does not erase the past. The voices of parents, teachers, society still echo, but they no longer dictate. They become part of the background, like old songs heard from another room. The person listens, nods, and chooses differently. They are no longer a puppet pulled by strings of approval. They are a creator, shaping life by choice rather than compulsion. The transformation is visible everywhere. Work no longer defines worth. It becomes an expression of gifts. Relationships are no longer cages of duty. They are chosen bonds of love. Even solitude, once feared as failure, becomes sacred space where the self can breathe. The body feels lighter, the mind clearer, the soul more at peace. Not because life is easy, but because it is finally their own. Psychologists emphasize that authenticity is not a destination, but a practice. Each day, expectations return, knocking at the door with familiar demands. Each day, the person decides again, asterisk, do I live for their approval or my truth? Asterisk, and with each choice, the authentic voice grows louder, steadier, more confident. In the end, the burden of expectations does not vanish. It transforms. What once was a weight becomes a lesson. The person carries not the pressure to perform, but the wisdom to discern. They no longer confuse applause with love or approval with belonging. They understand that the greatest betrayal is to abandon the self, and the greatest loyalty is to live in alignment with it. In psychology, they say that freedom begins the moment you stop asking, asterisk, am I enough for them? Asterisk, and start asking, asterisk, am I enough for me? Asterisk, and when the answer, whispered honestly, is yes, the burden falls, and life finally feels like your own.